Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game Develop Repeat. Normally, we talk about a game that I enjoy, what makes it special, and what we as game developers can learn from it. But today, we're going to mix it up just a little bit. I am going teacher mode and talking about why a platformer or a similar small scale game is the perfect project for learning the basics of game development. I am your host, Chris, a music educator turned indie game developer, and today's episode is all about platformers. In this episode, we discuss rapid iteration, structuring a project to optimize your learning, learning to focus on small details, and feedback loops. Let's get to it. I'm about to do something that I never thought I would be doing, which is convince other people to make a platformer. I genuinely feel that this project has been so insanely valuable for my learning process as a game developer that I can't recommend it enough. I think making a platformer is a really good starting point, or a similar small scope project. But listen to the lessons that I pulled from a platformer and ask yourself, this genre that I'm looking at for my first project, do these lessons apply? Are these things that I will get from this project? Are there things that are going to be super, super overwhelming in any of these categories? Maybe you try it anyway, but maybe scale it back and just make sure that it's a finishable project. So it doesn't have to be a platformer, but I'm going to tell you why this has been so valuable for me. And I do believe if you don't know what genre to make and you know anything about platformers, I think you should just go ahead and give it a shot and just make it a very small project, right? This project I've been working on could have been done a long time ago, but I kept having new ideas and changing features and all this good stuff. Okay, let's jump in. Let's get specific. Here, let's just go point by point. My first point is quick level design iteration. This has been the most important factor in skill development in this project. The place where I got stuck was level design, and it's the place that I think I learned the most because I was able to iterate very, very quickly, and I was able to learn a process for designing new levels that really made me think about how are these mechanics interacting with each other? How is the player reading this level? When they see this, do they want to explore? Am I punishing them for exploring? Am I rewarding them for exploring? What's going on if they go this direction or that direction? What does the level imply that they should do? All of this stuff I had to play with, and it was easy to just make a level, test it, have somebody else play it, look at their reactions, look at what they do, and go, oh, they're getting lost because there's all this open space and the game implies that you can go there, but it's really useless space, right? Or I look at it and I go, oh, they think that they should do this, but they should actually do this. And it's easy to just quickly iterate on these levels within a platformer because there's not a ton going on in terms of building up the level, but there's a lot of thought behind the level design. And you really get into the fundamentals of level design. You really have to look at it and you're just going, like for me, it's a 2D platformer. You're going, okay, they can only go left, right, up, down. Where am I telling them to go and what happens if they go there and what happens if they go somewhere else? So that is huge. You're really paring it down. So if you were doing this in a different genre, I would say really pare it down, lock it down, figure out I guess what I'm saying is make it a small enough element of the game that you can quickly decipher what is going on. You can quickly get feedback, and there's not too much data out there that makes it really confusing. Like if there's a huge storyline going on and all this other stuff, it can be really confusing as to why somebody is enjoying or not enjoying your game. You kind of got to get to the bottom of that. If your game is extremely simple and has like one or two mechanics and just like even with that, it's very complicated. So there's a lot less to focus on. Here's another aspect. So that's quick level design, iteration. And then next part, tons of example projects to compare to, and I mean tons. There are so many platformers out there to study. And yes, this applies to almost every genre, but platformers are all similar enough that you can go out there and you can just go, oh, this is what's different between this and my game. Oh, this is what's different between this and my game idea. This is what's similar. This is what they're doing. How are they keeping their movement so tight? Why does my movement feel so weird? Right? It's so easy to do a side-by-side comparison between your platformer and somebody else's. You can even expand into the genre of Metroidvanias and do a little bit of comparison there if you want to. There's a lot of space to learn from other people, which is huge. One you might look at another genre and go, "Oh, I can totally do that here. Perfect. Do it there. That's great." I will say with something like with a story-based genre, your mindset is going to be in a different place. So I can't speak to that much, but I do know it's going to feel like a different, you're going to be coming at it from a different angle if you're looking at like a narrative structure. Like if you're working on like a visual novel or something, I feel like that could be a decent starter project, right? Like a very small scale story-based text adventure kind of thing. Visual novel kind of thing. But I feel like the comparisons are going to be very different because if your genre is like sci-fi and then the vast majority of visual novels are like anime romance, it's going to be like, okay, I can't really compare these things. But you can look at some other stuff that they're doing. You can look at like how they're structuring their plot points and their decision trees and stuff, I guess. Next point. Is the game fun? Is a question that we are constantly asking ourselves. In a 2D platformer, it's really obvious. It's like it is like slapping you across the face whether or not your game is fun. And you'll be able to tell. You'll have moments where you're like, oh, it's just not fun. It just controls terribly, right? You're like, this is just wrong. That's not reacting the way I want it to. Because every time something doesn't control right, you're gonna have this mild feeling of frustration. You're gonna have this moment of like, God dang it. You're going to get so upset in like, if you really pay attention to your own reaction, like you might numb it out or whatever, but if you're really like open to your own feelings here and you're playing your own game and the controls are acting up or the animations are looking dumb or like something is just funky or the level design is confusing or whatever, you're going to be like, this isn't right. This isn't fun. Something's wrong. Not as much with level design, actually. Sorry. Level design is tricky because you know your intentions, and that really changes the way you interact with the level. But I do think it's easy to tell if it's fun. If you've got a narrative game, not as easy to tell whether or not it's fun. If you're trying to make an epic, grand JRPG, you can't play test the mechanics. Like, you can't figure out if that's fun unless you're having a very mechanic-based JRPG, because so much of the fun in those games is the story. They're like weird operas. It really is like JRPGs are the operas of the video game world. I really believe that. They always have these bizarre stories. The soundtrack is the main reason people love them, at least for me. They make no sense. You fight God. It's totally just like a weird version of opera. They're way too long. I'll have to make a whole episode about JRPGs and operas being basically the same thing. If I haven't already, I may have already gone on that rant in one of my Final Fantasy episodes. Okay, next point. So, sorry, that last point was, is it fun becomes very obvious. Next point, it is forcing you, if you were really paying attention to the quality of your game, right? If you're trying to make something pretty quality, it forces you to either have an interesting, creative idea or polish up everything so well that it feels good, like really good. It forces you to focus on these small details, right? It forces you to focus in on making the game fun through polish and creativity. You can't just have an idea, throw it into the game, and go, oh, it's perfect. No, you have to have like all these creative solutions to things. You have to make it. If you just try to clone Mario, you're not going to nail it. You have to polish it up. You have to make it feel right, right? Also, if you try to make some weird game involving like a hook shot, which also like that's gonna be more challenging than it initially sounds like, I think. But if you try to make some weird game with like a mechanic like that, you gotta implement it right. So then you really gotta be creative with your level design, and you will know if you were paying attention, if you were comparing your game to other games a little bit, not in the way where you're like, oh, is it as good as this? But just in the back of your head, you're like, does this feel good or not? What game did feel good? Why did that feel good? Oh, it felt good because of this. Okay, is that something I need? No, it's not that. It's something to do with the animation not feeling right. It's not reacting the right way, right? That kind of comparison, not the kind of comparison where you're like, oh, I'm not making a game that's as good as the best platformer that's ever been made. I'm a terrible person. Oh, God, I'll never make it. No, that is not the comparison that we're looking for. We're just looking for, oh, hey, what did they do to polish this up? What did they do to make jumping off of the end of a ledge feel smooth or feel right? Like, do I need to add some like coyote time? Coyote time? I can never pronounce that. Coyote time being like the extra frames when you walk off the ledge where you can still jump even though you're not actually touching the ledge. Um, yeah, stuff like that. Like you really start paying attention to the tiny, tiny details, which is huge. So much of game development, so much of game design is tiny, tiny little freaking details, right? Even like menus and UI. How many times have I talked about a UI driving me crazy? I guess it's not as much on this podcast, but like sometimes the UI on a game will make me just stop playing. I can't stand it. Actually, in the Age of Wonders podcast, I talk about how that game is the newest Age of Wonders is a masterpiece because the UI is so vastly improved. In the Starfield episode, I talk about how bad the UI is and how it ruins the game for me. Sorry, Starfield fans, it just did. It's just not for me. That's what it is. Little details, little polish, little quality of life things. You're going to be paying attention to that. And then you're going to use that skill in every single game you develop for the rest of your life. And I think a platformer is a really good spot to learn that. If you jump in with an RPG, I don't think you're going to get it immediately. I don't think you're going to get that polish. How many times have we played an RPG from like RPG Maker or something and you go, something's just not right. And I don't know what it is, but it's just not. It's all the rough edges. You're grinding up against rough edges everywhere you go because they haven't looked at these tiny things that are just barely affecting it, but it's barely affecting it every moment of the game. There's something in the menu that's just a little too slow. There's something that's just not responsive enough. There's some rough edge that you were grinding up against. And this little platformer helped me find those rough edges and buff them out, and I loved it. It's great. Next point. Sorry, I'm going off. I've got a lot to say about this because I'm at the end of a project and I feel like I've learned a ton from it, and I hope this is valuable to you too. Next point is random challenges like level or data management and like managing JSON data and like other challenges. I think you would get this in an RPG, and I think it would be overwhelming. I think it would actually be a lot of it. Here you just kind of touch the edges of it and get to know it just enough. I had to learn like some save data management and stuff because you're going from level to level to level to level, and I want to like manage that data, and I wanted to create a level menu where you can jump to any level you want. I don't want levels to be locked at the beginning. I want it to be like, oh, you beat the game, you uninstalled, you're on a different device, you lost your data, whatever, just start at level 25. I don't care. Why am I going to stop you from playing level 25? You bought the game. Like, jump in, play level 25. You don't have to play 1 through 24 if you don't want to. Like, if you jump to 25 and you're like, this is hard, you can go back to level 2. You know that. I don't need to force you on that. Like, it's fine. Go ahead, be cocky. Jump to level 50. See what happens. But yeah, there's all these little miscellaneous challenges while setting up features like that. You're like, oh, how am I going to manage this data? How am I going to, whatever, set up a menu, create this UI thing, travel from world to world, manage the player state from stage to stage. It's just like simple little things. You're going to run into them in pretty much any game, but I like that you run into them not so much in this game. I didn't have to deal with an inventory management system. I like that. I'm going to learn how to do that because that's going to be important for my future games, I think. But it's nice to not start with inventory management because that's not fun. Everything you're doing making a 2D platformer, you get an impact pretty quickly. You feel the effect of all the decisions that you make, and it's beautiful, right? It's really nice. Not that you don't get that with like an inventory management system, but I do think it takes a little longer to get to the payoff. And then once you get it, you're like, yeah. Because, man, when I was working on some UI stuff, it was like once I finished it, which, by the way, like realistically speaking, it took months because I like took a big break from it and popped back into it and like had to like simmer on a bunch of ideas. But once you finish it, you're like, wow, this is amazing. This is beautiful. So satisfying. Last point on why you should make a platformer is small changes, huge impacts. And I think this is a fundamental part of game design that you can see very quickly when you're making a platformer. You feel it very fast. You make a little change to movement speed, you feel it. In a JRPG, you make a little change to some stats, it might take you a little while to see what the impact is across the entire span of the game, right? I think other games like this, like arcade shooters, puzzle games, there's all sorts of games where little changes have huge impacts immediately, and you will feel them in your testing instantly. If you're doing something that is very, very deep in the spreadsheets with like statistics and stuff, you may not feel the impact as quickly and you may have to like look at it and watch it and track it. But a simple game like this where you see the impact helps you really understand on like a visceral level. It helps you feel the fact that every change you make has a big impact and you need to be attentive with that in the future, in your future projects. Okay, just to quickly reiterate all the points that we've just made here. 1, quick level design iteration. 2, tons of example projects to compare to. 3, is the game fun? Becomes extremely obvious. And all those small changes we were talking about, their impact becomes really obvious, right? And whether or not they make it fun, right? It's going to force you to be creative or to do a lot of polish, or it's going to force you to really pay attention to the small details and the quality standard of your game. And then you're going to have your level and your data management and all these miscellaneous challenges. Maybe you're messing around with some JSON data. You got little challenges, but they're not so overwhelming. And then I already mentioned this, but the last point is small changes, huge impacts. Every little change, you're going to see the impact, and that's going to teach you some really valuable lessons. As far as the actual development process goes, as far as developing a platformer goes, I have a couple of important thoughts. 1, if this is your first project, accept commercial failure. Accept it from the beginning. Say, hey, I'm a solo dev. I'm an indie dev. I'm working on my first project. It's a platformer. It's a flooded market. It's all this stuff. I'm learning. I'm here to learn. I'm not going to sell a lot of copies. That's fine. I'm going to have this project in my portfolio. I'm going to have it in the back. Maybe I can give it away to people in the future as like a promotional material, as like a bundle. Maybe I can, there's all sorts of things I can do to leverage this product later. Maybe I can polish it up. Maybe I can go and make some changes in the future. But right now, you're learning. You're making this game. That's it. You're learning by doing. And you can sell this product. In fact, if you get to a point where you're like, I am not ashamed of this product, I'm pretty happy with it, and I think that the price that I want to charge is genuinely fair for what this is. In fact, I think it's a good deal. I want it to be a bargain. Great. Sell it. But do not expect success. If you put that $100 up on Steam to sell your project, just expect to lose the $100. It's fine. Just lose $100. That's what's the cost of a college course, right? Like, this is way cheaper. right? Fair enough. And then maybe one day it'll make some money. Maybe one day you'll make $1 per hour that you put into making the game. So be it. You learned a ton. That is the real value of this first project. If you're not wanting to make a 2D platformer because you're worried about selling it, I'm sorry, man, but it's your first game. You're probably not going to sell well. You know? The first time you cook a grilled cheese, do you sell it at a restaurant? No. And maybe you're like, oh, well, I've made a couple small projects. Have you made a full commercial release? You know? Have you made something big enough? Like, have you made something at scale? This is your first day on the line cooking up meals for everybody. It's going to be messy. And maybe you do sell. Maybe you do make some cool sales. Great. That's amazing. That's fantastic. That is the best thing I've ever heard. Congratulations. Sell like crazy. Whatever. Make your money. Great. Beautiful. I love it. Don't go into this process expecting to make a bunch of sales on your first game. Just learn so that you can get better and better and better and better. Make the best freaking game you can. Enjoy making the game. Make a game you are happy with. Make a game that you think, yeah, it should sell because it's good. But don't expect it to sell. Make it good enough to sell, but don't expect high sales. That's what I think. I haven't sold mine yet. That's coming. And once I do, and once I get numbers, and once I get info, and once I do my whole marketing thing, I'll tell you all how it goes. That's the plan, at least. But, yeah, just chill out. It's your first, you're making a 2D platformer to learn, not to be rich. You're not going to be a millionaire off your first project. Probably, There are the 1 in a million people. It happens. Stuff happens. It's pretty cool. Don't take that risk, that emotional risk, intentionally. Just make a thing you love, and if it ends up being successful, beautiful, fantastic. Next thing, what makes a good learning project? We just talked about all this stuff with 2D platformers, but you might be sitting there and going, man, screw 2D platformers, screw platformers. I got no interest in a platformer. I don't want to mess with that. What are the fundamental things in this project? Like, get rid of all the benefits we talked about already. Ignore that for a second, right? If we don't want to get really caught up in the nitty-gritty details, what is like the core takeaway? What is the stuff you can look at and just go, this is what I want in my project. I can't know everything. I can't know the future. Just give me like 2-3 points to look for before I start a project to say, hey, that's a green flag. Give it a shot, right? Here are my thoughts from an education perspective, okay? 1, small with minimal scope creep potential. And if there's a lot of scope creep potential, you better lock that down quick because you're going to want to creep the scope no matter what. You want it to be something where it is hard to creep scope, as hard as possible. Everything can scope creep. Small with minimal scope creep. Why? Because you don't want to be stuck in this project for 4 years, because that will ruin you if the project goes poorly. Psychologically, it's such a huge hit to spend so much time on a project, release it, and then it bombs. That's horrific. You don't want to do that to yourself. It takes an iron mind and an iron stomach to take that kind of a hit. You want to go small risk with a pretty high reward, right? You go in, you make a project, and you make sure that you are okay with it failing. That's one of the things that makes this a good learning project. Small, minimal scope creep, so you're not spending forever on it. Next point, relevant to your interests. You have to be interested in it. If you're not into the 2D platformer thing, that's fine. Don't do it. If you have something where you have really strong emotions about a genre, though, like you hate some genre, if you can pin down why you hate that genre, it might be the perfect project. If you have strong feelings about it, it might be perfect. Because you might just go, oh, well, I can just do that genre, but without that issue that I hate, right? Then it's perfect. Then it's the perfect project. So yeah, it's got to be relevant to your interests. You got to have something in there where you're invested, where you're emotionally invested so that you will keep doing the project. And maybe the emotional investment is just, I really want to make this thing. As long as it's an emotional investment that holds up, right? And then lastly, and this is the most important part of picking a learning project, I cannot stress this point enough. This is huge. This is extremely valuable. And if it's not inherently part of your project, you should set up some kind of a system to make sure that this happens. You want a strong feedback loop. You want it to be easy to learn from what you are doing. You want to be able to jump straight into playing the game as soon as you make a change and say, did that make this better or worse? You want to write your code and say, what did this change? Did this fix things? Did this add bugs? You want to be able to very quickly learn. You want to know almost instantaneously whether or not what you did was a mistake. And you need it to be easy to iterate again and again and again and again, to just try new things over and over and over and over and over. That is huge. If you have that environment, you can learn, and you can learn quickly. If you are not getting feedback on what you were doing, and you're not able to playtest rapidly, if you're not able to get this information, you're in a tough spot. You can't learn if you don't know the impacts of the things you just did. So if your game has some system where it's like, oh, I won't know if this is fun until I'm 3 hours deep into the game, don't do that as a first project. All right? You need to know if it's fun immediately, right? You need to know quickly. If you're working on something narrative, make it a very short story. Make it small. You got to be able to iterate. You got to be able to figure out whether or not it's enjoyable very quickly. And have some testers. Have some other people try it for you, because you will get blind. You will get lost in the sauce. You will lose track of whether or not your game is good because you know too much about it. Just to quickly reiterate, the points that we discussed in this section are: accept commercial failure, focus on learning and making a game that you are happy with. Worry about sales later. And then, what makes a good learning project? A small project that you're not going to get locked in on forever. It's got to be relevant to your interests and passions, and we need a strong feedback loop so you can learn quickly and repeatedly and develop skills rapidly. Let's do just a tiny bit of devlog stuff for my own game. I sent out 2 pre-release copies of my game. I had fun adding a little prank into one of them, adding a little inside joke into one for a buddy of mine, which was really fun. I made it so that the character makes a very specific death sound whenever they die, which is like a reference to a video that we have both been laughing about lately. I'm not really expecting much critical feedback this time around handing this out. I think one of the people I sent it to will give me some critical feedback. I'm hoping so. But generally, I'm just expecting like, oh, there's some catastrophic bug thing, right? If something like that happens, or if there's something where somebody goes, this just is not fun, right? Like if there's some huge catastrophic thing, I want to know. I want to know any critical feedback, but at this point, with the people I'm sending it to, I'm not expecting it to be like, I know that I'm not sending it to a bunch of strangers, so I'm not expecting to get like the most in-depth, like I'm not expecting like a whole bunch of alpha beta feedback, right? I'm just sending it out there to kind of get a last glance at it from people that I know, and I might send it out to a couple other people before I actually get to release, but that's where we're at there. I've done some paperwork for Steam for, being able to sell on their marketplace and all that stuff. I've started work on the trailer. I have a fun idea for the trailer, which is like, I think it's cute and fun, and I'm gonna keep playing with it, and I'll post it whenever I'm done. And then the one like emotional aspect I wanted to touch on is there is a fear, there is a terror that appears when you are close to release, and I am experiencing that. When I finished my Steam paperwork, I was like, oh God, oh no, I'm releasing a game. This is insane. I can't believe this is happening. And I was excited too, but there was this moment of like, whoa, oh boy, we're doing this, huh? This is coming up. This is wild. So just know that. You would think it would be like big celebration, but instead it's like, oh God. And I'm also excited, but also like, oh God. That's everything happening in the world of my games release. Let's go ahead and get to these last few questions, and then we will wrap up the show. All right, this week's questions, which I am still answering. First one, what genre do you dislike and why? I've got two. I've got platformers and I've got shooters. For platformers, as I mentioned before, it's the falling thing. It annoys me. It's like Sonic, original Sonic. I grew up playing it and it just drove me crazy. It just felt too difficult and weird, and like the reset time to get back to where you were and all that stuff bothers me. And then with shooters, it's the twitchy stuff. It's so twitchy and it's kind of uninteresting to me. Like it's the same gameplay everywhere. It's just like I feel like a lot of the times the guns, even though they have variety, they're not that interesting. Like OG Halo, I liked. It wasn't too twitchy. There was an Unreal Tournament game that I liked that didn't feel too twitchy to me. But a lot of shooters just feel like it's like you gotta just flick your wrist really quick and hit the button and like shoot. It's too quick. I don't like it. That's me. Is there a version of that genre which you would enjoy? The platformers, it's the one that I made. It's like a platformer where you're sticking to walls, a platformer where you're not in a rush to like jump. Like there's like not as, I don't know how to put it. It's something about sticking to things that makes me not hate it. It's like, I don't know. It's some like childhood thing where I'm just like, I just hate slipping down the wall and like drives me crazy. So in any platformer that has a very quick restart time is also great. Small levels, quick restart time. That's huge for me. As for a shooter, I think if it's like a slower paced thing, it's less of a one-hit kill and more of like a little skirmish that you enter with somebody, right? You have some combat for a second. You've got to think about things a little bit. You've got to like strategize. I don't know. That appeals to me with a shooter. My next game idea is actually a little bit shooter adjacent. It is not multiplayer, but it's like maybe like a turret shooter. We'll see. We'll see if I go with it. It'll be a while. Next question. What genre do you love? JRPGs. Love JRPGs. What is a beginner project sized version of that genre? That's a little tough. Like a miniature story, or like a collection of mini stories, something kind of like Live Alive, Live a Life. How are you supposed to pronounce that game? Live a Live? I don't know, man. But anyway, something like that where it's a bunch of like small stories. That way you can craft each story and kind of like switch it up without having to have these huge repercussions and rewrite the whole story based on one change. So that's an idea. Another idea would be like a text-based thing so that I don't have to deal with all of the art assets. Something with a lot of branching paths, but a very small, like a very short story with a lot of branching paths so that I can change each path pretty quickly and aggressively. Yeah, that's what I got there. I think that's fair enough. I think there's probably more in there, but that's what I can come up with right now. And the tip for this week is to switch up your routine. So if you are usually somebody who crams in order to learn stuff, space out the studying a little bit. Like do it a little bit during the weeknights. If you're somebody who usually does studying every single weeknight, maybe try like a couple weekend mornings. Maybe just record a little bit early in the day. Or maybe you're somebody who studies in the evening, study in the morning, right? Maybe you're a morning person, try the evening. Mix it up. Make sure you try a couple different things. Like maybe you're only doing what you're doing because you've always done it that way. Try something else. Don't be catastrophic with it, but just test some stuff out, see how it goes, see if it works better for you. That's everything I got for you this week. Thanks for tuning in. I will talk to you next time. Until then, get out there, make some stuff, play some games, and have a good time with it. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.